See you, Steve.
Likewise, mate. Here we go.
So thanks for being here, Steve. Besides being the greatest cricketer of all time, welcome to the Space Machines team as our brand ambassador. Thank you for being here and having this chat.
Yeah, it's great, mate. I've always been part of a cricket side, but now I'm part of a space team, so I'm really proud to be your ambassador and look forward to the good times ahead.
Let me start by, what was your first memories of being in India?
Yeah, well, it would have been the 1986 tour of India with the Australian cricket side. Landed in Bombay. And it was like I landed on another planet. I didn't know what was going on. It was just totally foreign to me. From the western suburbs of Sydney to Bombay Airport to getting on the team bus to travelling to the Taj Hotel. And I just looked out the window as we travelled on the bus, and there was just people everywhere. There was no one stopping at traffic lights, pedestrian crossings, no one stopped. There was animals, there was people, there was chaos, there was noise. It was just like, where are we? And that was my first snapshot of India. It was a fantastic cricket tour, that one. Dean Jones had an amazing double century in Madras in the Tide Test, which was a famous Test match in 1986. So that was one historic moment. And that first tour lasted about 3 months. I think all the players in the team got sick because we weren't used to the food. It was just totally foreign to us. There were big crowds. It was just a really amazing experience. And from there, I've been back to India probably 50 or 60 times from that. A lot of cricket tours. The 87 World Cup, which was a turning point in Australian cricket. We won the World Cup under Alan Border's captaincy. Eden Gardens, we played the final in front of 100,000 people who were all cheering for Australia because we'd beaten Pakistan in the semi-final, and our opponents, England, had beaten India in the other semi-final. So all of a sudden, all these Indians were cheering from Australia at Eden Gardens. That was an experience we'll never forget, winning that World Cup. And for Alan Border, it was really the first time he'd been successful as a captain. I was 23 or 24 years of age, and just winning that, we really felt satisfaction for Alan because he'd gone through a lot of tough times. And that was the making of the side from the Australian point of view. And then the 2001 was another historic tour, which I was captain of. We nearly won that series, but we were beaten in an incredible test match in Calcutta, where VVS Laxman and Rahul Dravid put on 281 in a famous partnership. After I enforced the follow-on, they won the test match and they won the next test match to beat us 2-1. And that broke our unbeaten streak of 16 test matches. So incredible moments in test cricket there. Also from a life-changing point of view, I was lucky enough to meet Mother Teresa on one of those tours. And that sort of led me into my philanthropy journey. So India's given me many lifelong memories, but also life-changing moments. But the first time I went back in 1986, I didn't know whether I loved or hated the place. I just knew it was so different. Over that following period of time, I began to sort of really love the people, and I find it as if it's almost my second home. Lots of friends there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, I grew up in India, and I watched Australian team and some of those series growing up, and it was fantastic. There was this connection of everything awesome that was happening in cricket was happening out of Australia, and the Sheffield Shield and Benson and Hedges, and growing up and watching these great Australian cricketers play and come to India and play, and so when I look back, I think there is this deep connection between India and Australia, bound by cricket. When you look back into your career, and you mentioned a little bit of that, how do you see outside of cricket? What are the other things in India as you've gone back and forth that have kept you going back and forth?
Yeah, interesting. Look, I has had that amazing connection with India now, and I guess I was sort of part responsible for the team actually embracing the culture and the people of India. When I first went there in '86, it was like this foreign place, and the crowds were noisy, and we didn't like the food so much, and everyone got a bit homesick and a bit sick, and so it was almost a siege mentality. So the next time I went back to India, I'd made sure that we tried to embrace the culture, enjoy what was happening around us, and learn a bit about India. And then we soon realised that the Indian population was so fanatical about cricket. That's why they were so noisy and so loud. So we really got to understand why they enjoy cricket so much, and that made us a lot more relaxed on the field. So I began to always have a look around at places. I was never one to stay in a hotel. I'd try and get out in the streets and meet people and take photographs and visit different places in India. So I had that amazing connection there. And when I finished playing cricket, I always wanted to go back to India to photograph all the scenes around cricket, because I wanted to understand why cricket was such a religion to the people of India like yourself. everyone in India, there's 1.4 billion people, they all know something about cricket.
Yeah.
And when I played cricket, I always sat in the front of the bus because I was inquisitive and curious. But I could never go outside the bus and take the photos I wanted because I always saw kids playing in the streets, in the alleyways, on the beaches. There was always a game of cricket going on. So a couple of years back, I decided to go back to India, take a good photographer friend of mine who's a fantastic photographer, so he could teach me about it. And I spent 20 days taking 20,000 photos, trying to capture the spirit of cricket. And we went everywhere, to the beaches, to the mountains, streets, to the slums. We photographed blind cricketers, women cricketers, disabled cricketers, played cricket with the monks in the Himalayas. Photographed a young 3-year-old kid who's a star on Instagram. We then went and visited the oldest living cricketer in India, who was a 100-year-old cricketer, and put together this amazing compilation of the spirit of cricket India. And behind that, we did a documentary because I love meeting people and seeing different things, and that was called Capturing Cricket. So India to me has been an incredible connection through business, through work, through friends, and I continually go back there. There's always a new challenge, and every time I go back there, it's always interesting. It's never boring. There's something going on, and I guess that's part of the reason why I'm involved with your company is that I'm really interested in the connection between Australia and India. Obviously, cricket is number one, but after that, education is really important. The space sector, which we're obviously in, is really important, and it's growing. And we speak English as a common language. Cricket is obviously important. Democracy is the same. The laws are pretty much the same. So that we have this amazing connection with India, and I think that in the future it's only going to get stronger.
No, absolutely. Look, and I think I can recollect the craziness of cricket, and you and I met 15 years ago, and I still remember this. We were traveling through Delhi in a car, and we wanted to go see a game. And as soon as they knew Steve Waugh was in the car, it was as if a million people had just moved aside and created a pathway into the stadium. So I think it was fantastic to. As an Indian growing up, we didn't realize how crazy we were about cricket until you see something like that. So,
who are your favourites growing up, mate? Who were you focusing on, Australia or India? Who was your team?
Well, so look, I grew up following, obviously the 1983 cohort of Indian cricket, Kapil Devs and the Ravi Shastris and, Vengsarkars and Gavaskars of the world. But I think, very early on, Australia provided that, that innovation in cricket. So, I followed, the team Boone and Marsh and yourself and Border and Dean Jones and Bruce Reeds and Craig Mugdum. And so I think all of the people I grew up with, they could rattle off stats, right?
Yeah, sure.
And it still amazes me when I moved to Australia in '95, people were just shocked. It's like, how do you know so much about Australian cricket? It's like, well, you grew up watching Australian cricket. So I think there is that deep connection. And when we caught up 15 years ago, right, it was one of those moments because I hate to admit it, but I did have a poster of you, right?
Well, good on you, mate. You're a good judge, eh?
Yeah. So I think it was one of those moments.
Was Australia the number 2 side? Obviously, India was your number 1 side.
Yeah. So I think at the moment it's I go for India, and then if India's not playing, it's Australia, right? Second, and then the rest of them follow.
So you said you came to Australia at what age? At 17?
17, yeah. 95.
Why did you come to Australia?
I came here to study, right? I wanted to do engineering. I wanted to do aerospace engineering. And so Australia was, Australian National University was where I ended up in Canberra. Yeah.
So was space always your first love? Is that the area you wanted to get into? And why now? Why are you so focused on space now?
Yeah. Look, space has been fascination since I was a kid. I always wondered. I saw Indian space program develop through the 80s, 90s. It was a tough place. There was a lot of sanctions back then in the 80s, being part of the Soviet bloc and the rest of it. So it's very hard to get access to space technology. And so I think by moving to Australia, by studying here, I got that opportunity to learn and train in space. And so I think it was a life-changing move.
Yeah. And how has it changed the space sector in Australia? Is there more emphasis on it now? Is there more focus on it? Is there more of a spotlight on what's going on?
Yeah, look, I think in terms of the history of space in Australia and India, quite similar. Both around the 60s, there was, Australian space really started with the Apollo program. We were deeply involved with the Apollo program.
Yep.
There's lots of stories about how, our efforts to communicate with the astronauts on the moon. There was a space program. Somewhere along the line, we stopped thinking about space proactively, but in the last 5 years, Australia's picked it up again.
Yeah.
There is a deep psyche that likes and wonders what everything that space means in Australia. And that's very similar to India. You had a situation where you didn't have a lot of resources in India, but they started working on a space program early on.
Yep.
And over the last 20 years, that program's matured and it's now one of the leading spacefaring nations globally. So I think there's a lot to share between the two countries.
For sure.
So
I think when you're a kid, you ask every 5-year-old kid what they want to be. And I was the same. You either want to be a sportsman or you want to be an astronaut.
Right.
Were you the same when you were growing up? Or not?
Right. Well, yeah. I think I played cricket for my school, and at one point it was a choice between hey, what do you make your career? So it was either going to be something to do with space, or it was going to be a cricketer. So maybe you can be both, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So
you're more talented in the space sector.
I
than
hope
the cricket
so.
sector?
I hope so. I really hope so, because cricket didn't pan out. I think the spirit and the determination on taking on big challenges, a lot of things that, when you think about sport and excelling in sport, translate really well to the type of things you need to push forward. Because space is hard. It's not something that we, think about every day in our lives, but it's important. It's part of our daily lives. And it's super hard. It's something that's unknown. It takes a long time to build something, to get it to space. It requires a large team of people motivated together. So I think there's a lot of parallels to draw between cricket and sport in general with space.
Yeah, it seems like. Cricket, obviously, the number one thing I always say to people is you need perseverance, resilience, persistence, and the ability to overcome obstacles and bounce back the next day. Because cricket, as you say, is a tough sport. And I played for 20 years at the top level. And I would think more than 50% of my days didn't go that well.
Yeah.
So if you didn't have the ability to come back, then you weren't going to make it. And I think that's why people say cricket is a mental game, because you've got to have the skills, but most importantly, you've got to have that ability to bounce back and show your true colours when things aren't going well. So are they similar to the challenges that present in the space industry? Have you got to be persistent and resilient?
Absolutely. Look, when you think about a space program, whether it's Americans, Indians, even in Australia as a nascent space industry, the resilience, the grit, and I think you mentioned something there, which is the ability to bounce back and put it behind you.
Yeah.
You look at India going to the moon; they reached on the third mission. It took them 3 missions, but you have to go through that failure to understand how to succeed. And I think the faster you bounce back, the faster you can get back on it. And I think that's something that culturally we have to embrace. And I think we do a great job of embracing that as a sporting nation, as a cricketing nation. I think we've got to figure out how we translate that to, science and technology. How do we become more resilient?
Yeah.
So that's something that I think, cricket has a lot to teach. Sport in general has a lot to teach to us as a spacefaring culture.
For sure.
So
yeah. Look, I'm still learning about this sector, I must admit, but satellites do fascinate me. I was just, how many satellites are there actually orbiting space now? Because I was surprised when I spoke to you about this. How many satellites are currently in the space now, and how many are going to be there by, say, year 2030?
Yeah, look, at the moment there's about 12,000 satellites, and that's a big number if you think about it, but it's meant to get to 50,000 in the next 5 years. So, 4 times the number of satellites. And with each of these satellites going up, the dependence we have on Earth on a lot of these things, whether that's our ATMs, whether that's our apps on our phone, our harvesters in the middle of Australia doing agriculture, increasingly everything in our life is starting to depend on the data that comes from space. And we don't think about it at all, right?
No, I have no idea. So you're saying if a satellite's damaged or becomes not usable, then it can affect something here directly back on Earth?
Absolutely. A great example.
What's an example?
Yeah, exactly. August last year, one of the GPS satellites stopped working, and all of the harvesters in the middle of Australia stopped working. And so nothing could happen. There was no crops being harvested. And that meant $1 billion a day of cost. There have been numerous instances of where, some of these satellites have gone down and you can't access your ATMs. Some of your mobile phone time works on satellites, your climate data, disaster. So there's so many examples where daily life is being impacted. And so, it's time that we start thinking about what space means to us as a culture, as a civilization.
So how currently now, if the satellite goes down, how is that fixed or how is that serviced or looked after? What happens now?
Look, at the moment, it's just use and throw. Like, if something happens, the only other option you really have is send a new one. So, which if you think about it, if a satellite goes down, it'll take another 4 or 5 years to get its replacement into orbit. And that's not sustainable. It's a little bit like saying you've got a car, and if it breaks down, you leave it in the middle of the road and walk away and go buy a new car. Which means there are two things happening at this stage. One, your road starts to get full of broken down cars. And two, it's expensive. You can't keep doing it over a period of time. So I think that's the way satellites currently, that's the way it is. And we've got to change that because we're starting to create a lot of congestion, a lot of debris out there. And if it just keeps growing, it becomes unusable.
The average person like myself doesn't really understand that. When you say debris, what does that mean, and how much is up in space?
Yeah, look, by debris, it's every small bit of metal that is up there, and there's in excess of 100,000 pieces of material, everything from a body of a rocket to a failed satellite, small pieces that are broken up, and it's increasing. As more satellites are going up, that just keeps increasing. And there's a really interesting phenomenon that has been envisioned where sometime in the future, if it keeps growing, one piece of one piece of debris might hit another one and start a chain reaction. And that might make the whole thing unusable for all of humanity. And you don't want that.
No,
so we've got to clean it up. We've got to start thinking about how to clean it up, how to make our satellites a little bit more repairable.
So how do you clean it up?
So at the moment, there's no way to clean it up. But I think the first step is, can we go and check out where these pieces are? What's happening, how they're moving, how they're behaving. And if we can do that, then we can start to figure out whether we capture them and bring them down or we push them out. So there's a number of things you can do. But the first step is acknowledging and inspecting to see how you do it. And that's one of the things we're doing at Space Machines, really starting to think about how you solve that problem.
Is anyone else in that area at the moment, or are you sort of leading the way? Is Space Machines leading the way in that field?
I think there's a small group of companies globally that are starting to work on this problem. I think there's a recognition that it'll be something that, everyone will have to think about. We're one of a very handful of companies globally starting to think about that. There is a recognition globally that this is becoming a problem, but it's how you solve it. How much capital you put behind it. How do you get actually larger population, common people starting to think about this problem, right?
Yeah. How do you educate people that this is a problem? Because I'd say most people wouldn't be aware of it, including myself until recently. So how do we tell people? How do you educate people that there is an issue there?
I think we've got to raise awareness. We've got to start talking about sustainability. We've got to start talking about what it means to us. And I think the first step is we always wonder about space, but there's very little knowledge about how it plays a role in our lives today. And I think we've got to get out to people, start talking to them early, whether that's through schools, through universities, but also just through popular media, is really start to talk about the impact of space. And I think a great way to do that is to connect it with something that we already know very well. And that's why I think this connection of sport and cricket with space is a really good way to get people's attention to say, there are common things that we need to think about.
You talked about collaboration between India and Australia with sport. So what is the connection between Space Machines and India going forward?
Look, we have recently launched an initiative called Space Maitri, and Maitri meaning friendship. And it's a mission to bring together an alignment of the two countries on what we think about space, that piece of education. How do we raise the awareness? How do we collaborate technologically with Australia's deep heritage in space from the Apollo era to India's growth as an emerging power in space? And then education, like how do we connect our educational institutions here with India and really to start to learn more about space. So it's sort of, it's a mission that will bring together flying one of our satellites onto an Indian rocket, and it'll launch a bunch of technology into space that will prove some of those areas of debris and sustainability in space and learn from them for both countries. So I think it's a good way to connect the two countries, because I feel, cricket and space are the two real deep bonds and really deep things that both countries share.
So launching a rocket with a satellite, why do you need India to be a part of that? Why can't we launch a rocket in Australia? What's the connection between India and Australia in that regard?
Absolutely. Look, as in Australia, we have a lot to learn about space, and so there is. We are building a rocket in Australia. So there's a company in Brisbane that's building a rocket. As we get there, there's also other areas for us to collaborate, and so I think there's going to be a good exchange of technology between the two countries on rocket, but also on satellites. I think, Australia getting launch capability, which is launching rockets capability, will bring us to par with the world. And I think we've got to compete globally. And so that is, what happens once you get to space. So, working with India, working with the US, we're working with our other partners, really starting to build this capability and, bring it back into our, popular zeitgeist, right? We're really starting to think about how we make space a conversation we can all have. So
it'd be great to have Indians and Australians talking about something other than cricket, because if I go there in India, it's 1.4 billion people know everything about cricket. They know more about my life than I do. So it'd be nice for me to talk about another topic other than cricket and photography. So
hopefully both, right?
Yeah,
hopefully
exactly.
both at the same time. So I think that's why I find this this partnership and using cricket as a common route to explore other areas of collaboration, because culturally there's a lot of similarities, and how do we harness those to talk about some other areas that we could be great partners with India. So I think it sort of reminds me of, like, now when I look back to cricket, a lot of cricket in India now reminds me of the Australian way of playing cricket. When I look back to the recent Indian teams, it gives me a lot of sort of early 2000s, Ricky Ponting and Matthew Hayden and Gilly. When you think about that sort of aggressive, we will not, we will go out and we'll just want to win, and that grit and perseverance. I think, Australian way of cricket has had a huge impact in the last 20 years on Indian cricket. And so, is that the way you see it as well?
Yeah, I've noticed a change. I think Saurav Ganguly was probably the first one to sort of give India a bit more aggressive nature to their play. We're going to give it back to you guys, and we're not just going to cop it. So he was big on that. And then was taken to the next level with Virat Kohli, who played in a really aggressive and positive way and in your face, and very much like what we play cricket. So, yeah, I can see how India has changed from when I first started playing, where it was almost like a very polite game of cricket and there wasn't much set out in the field, and India played their way and we played our way. Now it's a lot more similar, probably because the IPL, all the cricketers play in India now, so they know each other really well and they've learned from each other. So, yeah, I think India's cricket has changed a lot. It's a bit more in your face, aggressive. India has a young population, average age 27, very educated, very aspirational. So I think this sector in space would definitely interest a lot of people. But there is a lot of similarities, and as I say, I've been involved in cricket, photography, philanthropy, and that's another area that I just sort of got into, and all of a sudden that really increased the relationship between Australia and India. So many people ask me about the charity work I do in India. So I think when Indians and Australians have a lot of similarities, a lot of similar interests, and really enjoy each other's company. So I think it's a great bond to have.
Yeah, look, and I reflect India's journey through the space program, and it's been like, hey, not a lot of resources, but we're going to keep pushing really, really hard. And when I sort of contrast that to, as recently as the last one-day World Cup, India won all of its games leading up to the final. Yeah. But there's this belief in Australia, and team that it doesn't matter where you're at, you can win from any spot. And I think it's really interesting to see and find how do we translate that capability and that way of thinking into other areas,
Sure.
in business areas, technology. How do you become that belief in yourself and the ability to take risk, which I find quite contrasting that we do that in sports so well in Australia. How do we sort of apply that to other areas?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I think India have shown that, you see, in cricket before 1983, they were competitive, but they're from there to now where they're a superpower in cricket. They've really taken over a world that they really control world cricket. Their teams are always at the top, and they've really transformed. So if we can do that in the space sector, as you say, take those similar sort of lessons and goals and the aspirations, and there's no reason why we can't do that in the space as well, and particularly working together.
Yeah,
it's a great opportunity.
How do you connect with space, and what's been part of your journey in your life and where you've connected
Well,
with
I think about when I was a young kid, my favourite TV shows were the Brady Bunch,
yeah.
Gilligan's Island, but Lost in Space was number one.
Okay.
So I was always fascinated by that show. I just loved it. So growing up, there was that, and always dreamt about being an astronaut. As I got older, I took my kids to America and we went to NASA twice, spent a couple of days there, and I was just fascinated by that. Just the technology and the rockets and what people have achieved going up into space. And I was lucky recently, I had a charity walk in the desert, 4 days covering 100 kilometres, and the sponsor of that was Sierra Space. So I got to spend some time with an astronaut called Stephen Lindsay, who's done 5 missions to space, the most ever. And I spent literally 2 days walking with him in the desert for 10 hours a day, and I must have asked him 10 million questions. He was sick of me by the end of it. So that was just fascinating, what it's like to be to go into space and what you have to do. And he was telling me about these days they actually have weights on board, so they actually lift weights to keep their bones strong. So that was amongst thousands of questions I asked him. So space to me has always been something I've been fascinated by. Didn't know much about it, but really inquisitive to learn more. I've always been interested by it and what it can do for everyone.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, I think it's one of those things that generates this wonder of something bigger than all of us, right? In some way.
For sure, and I think one of my favourite movies is Apollo 13.
Yeah.
And I just love that movie.
That's my favourite movie too.
Yeah, what actually happened and how they solved a problem. So it just we've talked a bit about that. Solving problems in space. You've got to sometimes think outside the box and think differently and be innovative and inventive. And I really love that movie. So that's one of my favourite movies.
Apollo 13 is, and I think for me, another thing about that movie is it reminds me of sport. It's like a team sport, right? At the end of the day, everybody's got to do their job to make sure that you succeed. And so in some way, as long as you all do the things you're meant to do, you can make it work.
You're right, there's a lot of teamwork involved. Obviously, that was a life and death situation. Sport is not, that's a bit of fun. But back then, you had to get everything right and everyone had to know their place and work together and work as a team to solve a problem. So, that's probably why I was so fascinated by that movie. So your launch, your satellite Optimus, how do you see the issues, or what are the issues surrounding that, and what can it solve in space?
Yeah, no, look, Optimus is this satellite we're building, and what we're trying to do is think about it like a roadside assistance space. We're trying to build these vans that can go out and inspect, monitor, and provide some assistance to other satellites. So one way, or one of the problems we talked about earlier where, if satellites breaks down, what do you do? We want to make sure that we have enough of these satellites in orbit that if a satellite has trouble, it can go out, it can look at it, figure out what's wrong with it, and help fix it up and get it back on the road. So similarly to what happens with roadside assist or with what happens with ambulances and fire engines, how do we quickly respond to satellites needing assistance and then be able to address those things very quickly, because that's the fastest way for us to not have some of those scenarios where we lose access to a lot of these services that we get from space.
So what are the main benefits from doing that? You've gone through a few of those, but what is the main benefit from what you're doing up there?
Yeah, look, the main benefit is you've got to make sure there's minimal disruptions. Like, things we depend on today, we don't have to think twice about. So at the moment, these satellites, they cost a lot of money to build. It takes a lot of time to launch them. And that's only because everybody knows they can't be repaired in space. And so we build satellites to last for 15, 20 years. It costs a lot of money. It takes 5, 6 years. But if you knew that there was a roadside assist available type of service in space, you could take some risk. You could accept that, yes, it might fail, so it's all right. I can go there quickly because if I fail, somebody will come and help me out. And so our basic premise here is that space has got to be just like the roads, the air, the oceans. Everything we do on Earth has got to be just reflected in space.
As a sportsman, I mean, goal setting was really important for me playing cricket, looking ahead, what I wanted to try and achieve, how I wanted to do it. What are the goals for Space Machines going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of our long-term goals is to be able to service any satellite in Earth orbit within 24 hours. Just like you do with Roadside Assist, we want to be there when you need us. So when we can do that in a day, I think we're doing really well.
So in a cricket team, you got batsmen, bowlers, wicketkeepers, all-rounders. What have you got in your team?
No, that's a great question. I think a lot of the times people think that space is only reserved for space engineers, and I think the team is much broader, from everyone that's engineer, but also marketers, accountants, financial people, thinking about sales. It's a very wide, diverse set of skills that we need to address space. And one of the great examples was that with our last mission, one of the people who built the thermal blanket for the spacecraft, which is basically like a thing that keeps the spacecraft warm, was actually a fashion designer. So I think it's something that everybody from every aspect of society needs to be involved with.
Yeah, and obviously I was a captain, which is pretty important. Are you the captain of the team, or who's the captain?
I'm the captain of the team. I think I've got a great co-captain in my co-founder, George. But I think making sure that you've got a team that's diverse with diverse set of skills and knows exactly how to achieve that goal we talked about, I think that's the way to do it. So Steve, we'll be heading to BSX, Bangalore Space Expo, which is the annual conference in space soon. What do you think about that as part of the Space Machines team?
Yeah, look, it's different. I mean, I'm normally there for cricket or philanthropy or taking photographs. So this time I'll be there purely about space. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a great learning experience. I'm going to be asking a lot of questions. I'm going to want to find out things about space that I haven't learnt before. So for me, it's a new experience. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, Steve, here's a bit of a rapid fire.
Okay.
Favorite cricket ground?
Lords.
Early bird or night owl?
Night owl.
What's your number one Indian dish?
Fish curry.
Bucket list destination?
Patagonia.
Nice. Thanks for that.
I've got a couple for you now, mate.
Oh, is that right?
All right. Favourite space movie?
October Sky.
Mm-hmm. Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Of course, you're Indian. Biggest pet peeve?
Everything. I'm grumpy.
Good. A superpower you wish you had?
Music. I wish I could play a musical instrument.
Likewise.